vegetables to make them bigger, stronger, brighter, and last longer. Even animals and plants are crossed for scientific advances. It's the brave new world of so-called Frankenstein foods.
We are the guinea pigs.
But health is only one concern. The fear is also about the control of the food supply.
Biotech companies want to not only make enormous amounts of money convincing the world that the only thing to eat is genetically engineered food, but they want to patent the food. And they can do that by patenting the seeds and by controlling the seed companies.
One of the scare stories about GM corporations is that they have created a seed that'll make the farmer endlessly dependent, the Terminator seed.
The sole purpose of the Terminator seed is to create a seed which destroys itself within a year and does not, cannot be reused further seeds. So the idea is that people have to keep on buying new seeds year in and year out.
So conspiracy theorists believe GM techniques can stifle life, not just fiddle with it. The Terminator seed was developed in the late 1990s. Many major food companies have since been developing their own version of these sterilized seeds.
A lot of the distribution of seeds is becoming more and more monopolized in fewer hands. The fear is that eventually there won't be any choice in the matter.
The gigantic chemical companies have virtually cornered the world market on food seeds already. Now they genetically engineer those seeds and they say, voila, this is our creation, we own it, it's ours. And in order to buy it, to have it, to lease it, to use it, you have to come to us. We own life. This is what they really get off on.
But corporations have been stopped in their tracks. Protests amongst consumers, farmers, and environmentalists have halted the production of Terminator seeds. The US firm Monsanto was a GM pioneer and is now one of the largest GM producers. But in 1999, Monsanto's chief executive went on the record saying the claim that their GM seeds and foods were heading for world domination was nonsense.
I've spoken with many food processors and food manufacturing companies, and those who really believe that there is a consumer demand for non-genetically modified product have been able to find supplies for it. When the labeling process is complete, and I don't know when that will be, it will be available, I'm confident, side by side, and consumers will make whatever choices they want to make.
But fields have become test beds for GM seeds and crops. Activists in Britain have been arrested for destroying test sites. They fear that GM seeds can spread, contaminating surrounding fields and threatening the normal production of food.
None of us thought we had done anything dishonest, and the jury, I'm delighted to say, agreed with that.
These protesters were cleared of criminal charges, but GM testing remains legal. And will the next test sites be human?
What else are these companies going to be researching? Well, let's try to find a gene that can make people more sedate and docile. What an interesting idea. Let's research this. And if we can find such a gene, we can insert it in food. You can begin putting other things in here, into this food. You put vaccines in there, which is a project already underway. Now, for people who believe, as I do, that the research shows that vaccines are very toxic, you now have no choice. You get vaccines in your food. People, millions and billions of people, are going to be controlled. Issues of sickness and health as a result of what genes are placed into the food. Issues of, shall we sedate the citizenry by placing other genes in food? All of these issues are going to be decided by biotech companies and by their partner governments. They're not going to be decided by people. If you own the food supply, if you can patent the food supply, then you can surreptitiously put anything you want to in the food supply, and you can foist it off on the citizenry. That's the long-range plan.
Judy Barry was an environmental activist campaigning for the survival of the redwood forest on the west coast of America. She died in 1997 from breast cancer. But 7 years earlier, a bomb had exploded under her car.
It was an incredibly violent force, and I felt it rip through my body. I couldn't move. I thought I was entirely paralyzed.
When Judy Barry was pulled from the wreckage, she was immediately arrested by the FBI and accused of carrying the bomb herself.
You know, this was a pretty horrible thing. While I was lying in a hospital, you know, terrified and in excruciating pain and wondering whether I was going to be put in jail and not get to raise my children, it was just another element of the horror.
The decision to arrest was based on the placement of the device in the vehicle, the nature of its construction.
When the FBI arrested her, a lot of people around here thought that they were setting her up for something, and not many people believed that she was actually carrying the bomb. She filed a lawsuit alleging a conspiracy between the FBI and Oakland police to deprive her of her civil rights and false arrest.
Judy Barry and her movement hoped to get about $20 million in settlement. But Judy let it be known that she thought the timber industry and the FBI were in cahoots and had planted the bomb to scare her. Complicated conspiracies and counter-conspiracies such as these rarely provide final answers.
Hilda Murrell was 78 when she died. She was taken from her home. Her body was found with stab wounds 7 miles away.
Many questions remain unanswered about the fate of leading British environmental campaigner Hilda Murrell. The outspoken anti-nuclear activist had unearthed material about the Sizewell nuclear reactor. In March 1984, Lawrence Otter, a fellow campaigner, received an unexpected call from Hilda.
She said, "I've got a lot of papers I want published. I'm certain my phone is bugged. I'm certain there's people watching my house. I'm being followed as I get into the town. My house has been broken into once, and I'm scared." She said, could I come and collect the papers straight away? She didn't think it was safe even to keep them the whole day. Her last words to me were, "It's not only about nuclear power."
The meeting never took place. Hilda Murrell was last seen within an hour of the phone call. Lawrence Otter believes that the papers Hilda Murrell had told him about were never found. She was about to give evidence to a public inquiry about the Sizewell nuclear reactor. But family and fellow activists suspect she may have uncovered top-secret information about the sinking of the Argentinian ship, the Belgrano, by the Royal Navy during the Falklands War. Labour MP Tam Diel then accused the British intelligence services of being involved in Hilda Murrell's death.
I've made various inquiries from sources the names of whom wild horses won't drag out of me, and learnt very clearly. He said, yes, British intelligence was involved.
But a police inquiry cleared the secret services of any involvement in Hilda's death.
There is not one shred of evidence to even suggest that British intelligence were in any way involved in the murder of Hilda Murrell.
Her murderer was never found. The case was never resolved.
I can only assume that someone has told them that they don't want the case investigated. And I can only assume that that comes from very high up, at least cabinet level.
Conspiracy theorists claim that governments would kill to safeguard their interests, and it's not always paranoia. The Greenpeace ship Rainbow Warrior was sunk by the French Secret Service in 1985, and it cost the life of one on board. But some environmental conspiracies could be myths. They flourish where the interests of corporate giants clash with our concerns for health and survival. And when science fails to explain precisely what's wrong with the world, conspiracy theorists fill the gap. Some conspiracy theories in time prove to be well-founded. The scary part is waiting to find out which ones are false and which ones are true.
Literally, you're creating a Pandora's box, and that box is already opened, and it will continue to open.
This is mass poisoning of a population.
We have a history of using disenfranchised groups for human subject experimentation.
This was one of the worst atrocities that could be wreaked on a group of people by its own government.
Supposing you can create a super race, what then?
Was the HIV virus created by the Americans to reduce the world's population? Is the government experimenting on us? Could our drinking water be poisoned? Just 3 conspiracy theories question whether humans are being used as guinea pigs without their knowledge or consent. In 1930s Alabama, syphilis, a sexually transmitted disease, had reached epidemic levels.
Somewhere in the neighborhood of 33 to 34% of reproductive age individuals were apparently positive for syphilis.
At the time, there was no cure. In order to study the effects of untreated syphilis on black men, the U.S. Public Health Service set up the Tuskegee Syphilis Study in 1932.
The thinking was that African Americans reacted to syphilis differently from European Americans. The thought that since European Americans were intellectual, that it attacked their brain, and that African Americans who were physical, syphilis attacked their heart.
In total, 623 black men were recruited for the Tuskegee study.
They didn't get their consent, not to even mention their informed consent. They didn't even get any consent whatsoever.
The men all came from the Tuskegee area. Many of them did not even know what syphilis was.
They were told that they had bad blood and that they should continue coming to the health facility to be studied, you know, and treated.
And they were from rural areas, had little or no formal education.
You know, they had to sign, and many of them would come up, and instead of sign, they make an X, and then it meant I had to get 2 other people to verify their X.
These men were under the impression that it was a health program. They'd get a chance to see a doctor, and they believed that.
Throughout the men's lives, the progression of syphilis in their bodies was monitored, and at their deaths, autopsies were performed. But by 1947, 15 years after the start of the study, unknown to the men themselves, a cure for syphilis had been found.
Even after the invention of penicillin, when there could have been relief for these syphilitic men, it wasn't given because that would ruin the experiment.
At that point, continuing the study of untreated syphilis in the Negro male was utterly wrong.
No one knows exactly how many men died in the next 20 years as a direct result of not being treated. By the 1960s, a new era of civil rights was dawning, and questions began to be asked.
My first knowledge was around 1969 when a physician in the agency told me about the study and indicated that he felt uncomfortable with regards to the way in which the study was done.
The study was finally ended in 1972 after it was exposed as unethical.
When I finally read in the paper, I was angry. I was hostile. I felt like I had been trapped into something that I had no knowledge of and I had no control of.
It was sustained by the government, supported financially by the government, and they merely turned their head because they considered black people expendable and of lesser people.
On the 16th of May, 1997, 65 years after the study began, President Clinton publicly apologized for what had happened.
We can stop turning our heads away. We can look at you in the eye and finally say, on behalf of the American people, what the United States government did was shameful, and I am sorry.
For the assembled survivors and relatives of the deceased, it was an emotional day. AIDS, the modern plague. More than 18 million deaths and an estimated 34 million people infected with HIV. No one knows where the disease came from, or do they?
One of the conspiracy theories is that the virus, HIV, is a biological warfare agent.
According to all the scientific evidence, the vaccine given to gay men in New York City and blacks in Central Africa in 1974 was the vaccine that delivered AIDS to the world.
In other words, AIDS is no accident. Vaccines given to vulnerable communities were infected with HIV. But if this is true, it begs the question, why?
To support the intentional theory of AIDS, all one has to do is look at the outcome.
Whenever I think there's a disease that disproportionately affects the black community, the reality of our history with governmental experiments and so forth comes to bear on how we're going to interpret this new affliction.
There appears to be a 50-year paper trail with respect to concern as a national security priority that the overpopulation of Africa was an issue that would have to be dealt with.
But medical experts pour scorn on such conspiracy theories.
I know, just as other workers in the field know, that no such program ever existed.
You don't want to expose someone to a biological agent and then hope that they will die in 12 years. It's ridiculous.
So, if the HIV virus wasn't manufactured to target specific groups, could it have been unintentionally spread by polio vaccines? In September 2000, journalist Ed Hooper claimed that scientists working in the Belgian Congo in the 1950s grew their polio vaccines in chimpanzee kidney cells, which, unknown to them, were infected with the HIV virus. Impossible, say the scientists.
It has been shown that the process of developing the vaccine would inactivate the virus of AIDS, even if it were present.
If you look at the distribution of the vaccine and the distribution of HIV, you'll immediately say, oh, I don't think so.
Such accusations must be answered, not just for the sake of my personal reputation, but because if such accusations are allowed to stand, then the public begins to believe them.
Once a conspiracy theory gets started, it takes on a life of its own. Take fluoridation, the process of adding the chemical fluoride to drinking water.
If you have access to public water supplies, you hold the power to intoxicate mass populations. You therefore hold the power to commit genocide.
It's an essential. We all need water, and to put something in our drinking water, in my opinion, is absolutely criminal.
The debate about fluoride has raged for nearly 60 years. Fluoridation has even been called a communist plot. Its role is still a hot topic.
Fluoride is not only a great rat poison, but it is toxic to human beings.
I've never seen any kind of scientific study or know of one that has proved the ill effects of fluoridation.
It is a drug and it is a poison.
The element fluoride is naturally present in some drinking water.
Unfortunately, that gives the notion that it's safe, which it's not.
The first artificial fluoridation occurred in 1945 in the United States.
Water is now fluoridated in the U.S. just about everywhere, and generations have grown up with it and with much better teeth as a result.
Worldwide, there's 300 million people receiving fluoridated water for 30 or 40 years.
But for the anti-fluoride camp, it's not just about dental health. It's far more sinister.
It's a scam. It's a way of getting rid of a noxious product through the human kidney and get very well paid for it.
The conspiracy theory is that fluoride is a waste product which is put into water, solving a disposal problem for big business.
It's a waste product of the fertilizer industry, it's a waste product of brick making, and it's also a waste product of aluminium smelting.
The story goes, industries can sell fluoride to the water companies instead of paying for it to be disposed of.
The idea this is an ingenious scheme for dumping waste is another one of these fantasies, I'm afraid.
But what about the argument that fluoride improves dental health? There's substantial evidence that this is true, but some dentists argue we're getting too much fluoride.
I cannot understand why they should want extra fluoride in water when we know there's an awful lot of fluoride in toothpaste and people are probably getting poisoned by their toothpaste.
Perhaps arguments about fluoridation mask deeper fears.
We should not be allowing the government to dictate what should be injected into our bodies or placed in our water supplies.
If they are prepared to do this, and really unscrupulous government could be prepared to put some other kind of mind-altering drug into the water, why don't we put Prozac into the water and vote for the same government year after year after year?
The problem with conspiracy theories is that until they're proved beyond a doubt, they remain just that, theories. Nothing illustrates the frustration this can cause more than Gulf War syndrome.
If I was a veteran who had come back from the Gulf and I had been well, fit in the armed services, and over the next few years I started to develop illnesses, I would look for explanations.
When you look at all the factors involved and the way that we've been treated afterwards, there is most certainly a cover-up going on.
On the 16th of January 1991, a multinational alliance declared war in Iraq, and more than 700,000 coalition troops were sent to the Gulf. To protect them from chemical and biological weapons, troops were given a series of vaccinations. They thought nothing of this until they came home and some of them began to fall ill.
Before I went to the Gulf War, I was extremely fit. I was a marathon runner, and when I came back, I started up my running again, and the furthest I could go was about 5 miles.
There is no doubt at all that going to the Gulf has had a deleterious effect on the health of UK and American servicemen and women. There is therefore a Gulf health effect of Gulf illnesses.
But could it just be post-traumatic stress disorder?
Military officers, doctors, journalists have noticed repeatedly that modern warfare is followed by a period of illness in troops.
If you send young men to war, some come back with psychiatric and psychological injuries. But that alone does not explain the Gulf War illness effect.
Gulf War illness is characterized by a bewildering array of symptoms.
I'm starting to lose sensation in my fingertips. If I'm drinking, water trickles out the corner of my mouth like it does with a stroke victim.
Some veterans believe their children, born disabled after the conflict, have also been affected by Gulf War syndrome.
She's classified as chronically ill. If you took her feed away, then she would die. She'd die very quickly.
Millions of pounds has been spent on research in both Britain and the United States, but as yet, there are no answers.
I mean, there's been several theories brought forward. There's been the mixture of drugs that we was given. There was the depleted uranium that was put on the ends of the shells.
I very much wish we did know, because it would be so much easier in dealing with the veterans who feel themselves rightly, in my view, in many ways, to be aggrieved because they feel the government hasn't done enough.
With no definite answer, veterans are left to theory and rumour, the strongest suggestion being that the medication they were given was in some way to blame.
Many of the veterans that we've interviewed do believe that they were used as guinea pigs in some unnamed scientific or military experiments.
You know all the risks. You know you can come back in a body bag, you can come back as a casualty, but what you don't expect is that you've been used as a guinea pig.
The authorities insist their only interest was in the safety of the troops.
Had our soldiers not been fully inoculated against the full range of chemical and biological weaponry, I think we would have been guilty of gross negligence.
But there's another far-fetched theory about the troops' medication.
Gulf War syndrome is indeed the HIV envelope with one gene missing.
As the troops were embarking to go to the Middle East to allegedly defend democracy in the world, they were being injected, without knowing it, with a new experimental AIDS vaccine.
The Ministry of Defence have denied that any experimental vaccines was given to us.
I've never used any war veteran as a guinea pig for anything, and nor has any other minister in the British government.
A major stumbling block to the research is that many of the medical records were destroyed as the troops left the Gulf.
I'm quite sure that people who dispose of those records wish they hadn't. But my own view is that this was a bureaucratic decision, administrative decision done at a very low level without much thought to the consequences, and regrettable but not sinister.
But for the veterans, it suggests a cover-up.
We know how governments work. They can always lose bits of paper, can always lose records. They've been doing it for years.
I mean, there was no question of a conspiracy or a cover-up or anything else.
Without an answer, the veterans are stuck in limbo. Until they find out what's wrong, they can't claim compensation or even get appropriate treatment. In June 2000, the success of a major research project was announced, which promised us more answers than ever before.
The Human Genome Project, I think you could say, is just the most important scientific project ever carried out, if you could say, with relevance to human life.
So what is it? The Human Genome Project is a collaboration to map the precise composition of our genes, a human blueprint.
They tell us that we'll be able to identify what causes diseases, many diseases, genetic diseases, and because of what this thing called gene therapy is, we'll be able to treat these.
It will kind of usher in a new era of medicine in which we'll all have drugs sort of personally designed according to our genes.
Unsurprisingly, something which smacks of a brave new world is attracting the conspiracy theorists.
There's major concern among even, I believe, a consensus of scientists worldwide that we're playing with fire.
We do see the possibility of, developing of a genetic underclass and a sort of genetic elite, which, is a horrific possibility.
I would not want the research to bring us to a point where I would have been screened out before I had a chance to live.
One promised benefit of the Human Genome Project is it'll be possible to screen embryos for genetic defects. This raises huge ethical questions, mainly about the rights of parents to decide whether a disabled child should be born.
I don't think you know the hell that many parents go through because of terrible throws of the genetic dice.
All they see is the images of disability that are in the press and the media, and most of them, almost overwhelmingly, are negative.
It's within that climate that, parents come to make these choices.
Scientists involved in the project take a somewhat different view.
Disabled people have a pretty rough time, and I think the fact that we don't want or want to decrease the number of future disabled people born doesn't mean that, we won't love a child who's disabled.
There is an important argument that if you introduce a policy to reduce or eliminate a condition, that may lead to increased discrimination against people who have that condition.
The most extreme aspect of this conspiracy theory of genetic selection is that parents will not only seek to eliminate disability, they'll want to use genetics to create a super baby.
Opinion polls say that a lot of people, if they could choose the sex, the height, the appearance, the IQ of their child, they would think that this would be a lovely thing to do.
The Frankensteinian notion that we can create a super race of stronger, more powerful, more intelligent type of babies, to play that level of God with no risk is absurd.
If you want to say it's going to be very intelligent and it's going to be very attractive and it's going to be very healthy, I think you could say all parents would like that. So what's wrong with it?
Disabled activists say the whole premise is wrong.
All babies are perfect people. They may come in different guises, but they are perfect people and part of the whole jigsaw of the world.
So is the genetic engineering of the next generation fundamentally flawed?
To look for perfect children is looking for utopia, and utopia just does not exist. And anyway, I'm not sure I would want to live in utopia.
The fertilised egg, which produced me with my shortness, also produced me with, an above-average intelligence. If you're asking, did I want to be the result of another fertilised egg, I'm not sure. If it meant I was tall but stupid, probably not.
Conspiracy theories about the body are hard to ignore, because even a grain of truth means they have the potential to affect us all. Your body is your most private space. None of us wants medical science to turn it into public property.
It's an unrealistic goal, and it's an immoral goal to eliminate all suffering and difference.
I'm all for interfering with nature, because nature is very cruel at times.
People want a simple answer, even if the simple answer is not an answer at all.
There is not a waking moment that I am not aware of the fact that I have AIDS.
The scientists I know cannot keep a secret longer than 5 minutes.
And the problem with trust, it's like with virginity, that once you've lost it, you can't get it back.
The fear that things will come upon us in the night, that things will take our bodies and do with it what that will, have been fears that have been with us since we came out of the caves.
The real history of the world is a history of competing conspiracies.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman. We did not trade weapons or anything else for hostages.
There can be no whitewash at the White House.
Watergate, Iran-Contra, Lewinsky. The biggest American scandals in the last 30 years have one connection: the president. Conspiracy theories flourish around American presidents and their empire.
We have criminal politics. We have insanity.
With parapolitical manipulation.
Simple, sinister explanations.
Governments commit abuses and then governments lie about it.
Hand in hand with politics go the media, say conspiracy theorists. Manipulated by the government, in cahoots with the government.
The media is considered to be sort of an arm of government.
I think the mainstream press in this country does a very good job of that.